The steakhouse was buzzing with chatter, laughter, and the clink of silverware against plates. Families celebrated birthdays, couples leaned in close, and the waiters rushed from table to table. Yet in the corner booth, near the window where the soft glow of the neon sign bled into the glass, a man sat alone, his eyes scanning the room in silence. His name was Jack Carter, an Army veteran, widowed single dad, and a man who never quite got used to the stillness of civilian life. Jack had come here for something simple, a decent meal after dropping his 10-year-old daughter, Emily, at her friend's sleepover. What he didn't expect was that his instincts, forged in battlefields far away, were about to pull him into something life-changing. As he sliced into his steak, Jack's gaze fell on a table across the room where the town's police chief, Harold Bennett, sat enjoying dinner with his wife. The chief was a respected figure, known for his honesty and firm but fair leadership. But something about the man's body language set Jack on edge. The chief wasn't eating, he wasn't drinking. He was staring at the waiter, nervously, intently, as though words were caught in his throat. Then Jack saw it, the trembling hand gripping the edge of the table, the faint gasp for air, the pale skin. To anyone else, it might have looked like he was about to sneeze. But Jack knew better. It wasn't nerves. It was choking. Jack shot out of his seat so fast his chair toppled. "Don't talk," Jack said firmly as he rushed across the floor, startling diners who turned their heads in confusion. "You're choking. Don't force it," the chief's wife screamed, clutching his arm as panic erupted in the restaurant. A few people fumbled for their phones, others yelled out random advice, but Jack didn't hesitate. He wrapped his arms around the chief from behind, pressing his fist into the man's abdomen. 1, 2, 3 thrusts, the chief coughed, but nothing came out. Sweat beaded on his forehead. His lips turned a dangerous shade of blue. Jack gritted his teeth and slammed upward one more time with all the strength that years of discipline had left in him. Suddenly, a jagged piece of steak shot out onto the table, bouncing against a glass. The chief collapsed forward, gasping, his wife sobbing in relief. The room erupted in applause, but Jack wasn't listening. His heart pounded as if he were back on deployment. He looked at the police chief and gave him a steady nod. "Breathe. Slow and steady. You're all right now." The chief raised his eyes, gratitude flooding his expression. But then, something else. A flash of shock. His gaze flicked from Jack to the waiter, the same young man who had served their table earlier. The waiter stood frozen, pale as a ghost, his eyes darting toward the door. "Don't let him leave," the chief wheezed, clutching his throat. Jack turned his head, instincts flaring like a switch had been flipped. The waiter dropped his notepad, bolted for the exit, and Jack was already moving. His boots thundered against the hardwood floor, weaving through tables, his veteran reflexes narrowing his focus to a single objective: intercept. Outside, the night air was cold and sharp. The waiter sprinted down the alley beside the steakhouse, but Jack caught him halfway, slamming him against the brick wall. "What's going on?" Jack barked, holding him firmly but not cruelly. "Why were you running?" The young man's eyes filled with tears. I didn't mean for it to go that far. He broke down, shoulders shaking. Moments later, the police chief stumbled outside, supported by his wife, still pale but breathing. He looked at Jack, then at the trembling waiter. "He's been under investigation," the chief rasped. "Stealing evidence from our precinct. He must have realized I recognized him. That's why he panicked." Jack loosened his grip, stunned. The boy couldn't have been older than 21. His uniform was wrinkled, his shoes scuffed. He looked more broken than dangerous. The chief pulled out his radio, calling in his officers. Within minutes, squad cars arrived, lights flashing red and blue against the brick walls. The young waiter was taken into custody, his sobs echoing in the night. As the scene unfolded, Chief Bennett turned to Jack. His voice was hoarse but steady. "You didn't just save my life in there. You may have just saved my career, and this town, from a mess we couldn't afford." Jack shifted uncomfortably, not one for praise. "Just did what anyone would have done." But the chief shook his head firmly. "No. Most people would have frozen. You acted. That's rare, Carter." Later that night, as the crowd dispersed and the flashing lights faded, Jack walked back to his truck. He pulled out his phone and looked at the picture of Emily taped to the dashboard. A wave of exhaustion hit him, but also something else: pride. Not for himself, but because he knew Emily would hear about what happened. She'd know her dad wasn't just some broken veteran trying to hold things together. He was still a protector. Still a man who could make a difference. When he picked her up the next morning, Emily's eyes sparkled. "Dad, I heard about it at school. You saved the police chief. Everyone's talking about you." Jack smiled faintly, ruffling her hair. "All I did was help someone breathe again." But inside, he knew it was more than that. He had found purpose in a world that often felt empty. He had reminded himself, and his daughter, that even when life tries to silence you with pain, you can still choose to act. And that night at the steakhouse, 3 simple words carried more weight than anyone could have imagined.